Welcome back to the deep dive. You know, usually when we talk about business strategy, we use these very sanitized intellectual metaphors.
Right. It's always a game of chess.
It's a game of chess. It's navigating a ship. It's architecting a vision. It all sounds very controlled, very clean.
It really does. It implies that if you just have the right 5-point plan, if you just think hard enough, you win. It's almost mathematical.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But today we are opening a file that suggests something completely different. We're looking at a philosophy that says business isn't a game of chess.
Not even close.
It's trench warfare. It's a biological struggle for existence where the default state isn't profit. The default state is death.
It is a bit intense, isn't it? But that is the reality. I mean, that is the core of the figure we are discussing today. We are unpacking the mind of Andrew Grove.
The man who built Intel. The man who, you could argue, built the engine of the modern world. And the author of perhaps the most terrifyingly titled business book in history, Only the Paranoid Survive.
It's a striking phrase, for sure. And what we are going to see today, as we go through his biography, his management books like High Output Management, and his economic essays, is that paranoia wasn't just a catchy marketing slogan for him.
It wasn't just a metaphor.
No. It was a survival mechanism.
Yeah.
A deeply ingrained worldview that was forged in literal fire.
And that really is the mission for this deep dive. We aren't just going to list his accomplishments, though. I mean, they are massive. We want to understand the why.
The source code, so to speak.
Yes, exactly. How does a refugee fleeing a totalitarian nightmare, how does he turn that very specific, very personal trauma into a management system? Things like OKRs, strategic inflection points, that basically rules Silicon Valley today.
And we really need to dig into the technical side of this, too. Because you cannot understand Grove's paranoia unless you understand the specific brutal economics of the semiconductor industry.
That's a great point.
It is a business where you can be king on Monday and completely bankrupt on Friday if you miss one technology cycle. The stakes are existential, always.
So let's start at the source. Let's go to the very beginning. Because before he was the Time Magazine Man of the Year, before he was the CEO of Intel, he wasn't even Andy Grove.
No, he was born Gróf András István, this is 1936, in Budapest, Hungary. He's born into a middle-class Jewish family.
And if you look at the timeline of European history, I mean, he is essentially born into a collapsing building.
That's a perfect way to put it. He's born at the exact moment the world is about to tear itself apart.
The sources paint this picture of a childhood that is just one existential threat after another. It's almost relentless. But there is one specific detail from when he was just 4 years old that really stood out to me.
The scarlet fever.
The scarlet fever.
It is a crucial detail. In 1940, scarlet fever was a coin toss for a child. There weren't the widespread antibiotics we have today. It was often fatal.
And he survives it, but not without a cost.
Not at all. The high fevers, they rupture his eardrums. He is left with significant permanent hearing loss.
Just stop and think about the psychology of that for a second. You are 4 years old. The political environment around you is getting more and more dangerous. Anti-Semitism is on the rise. The war is starting.
Yet the world is getting louder in a terrifying way.
And your primary sense for monitoring that danger, your hearing, is compromised. It's muffled.
It forced him to develop a totally different relationship with the world. He couldn't rely on passive listening. He couldn't just hang out and absorb things from the background.
He had to lean in.
He had to lean in. He had to lip read. He had to focus with this incredible intensity just to understand what was being said in normal conversation.
That focus became legendary later, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Decades later at Intel, employees would talk about the Grove stare. He would just lock onto you, and it terrified people.
I've read about that.
But it originated from this childhood necessity of decoding a muckled world. He learned a lesson very, very early. If you stop paying attention for 1 second, you miss the signal.
And in his childhood, missing the signal could be fatal.
And that is not an exaggeration. That is literal.
Because by the time he is 8 years old, the Nazis occupy Hungary.
March 1944. And the efficiency of the horror is what is so staggering when you read about it. In a matter of months, nearly 500,000 Hungarian Jews were deported to the death camps. It was industrial-scale murder.
Grove, young András, and his mother are right in the middle of this.
They had to vanish. They had to become ghosts. They took on false identities. They were moving from apartment to apartment, being sheltered by friends who were risking their own lives to do it.
It is the definition of hiding in plain sight.
It is. I mean, can you imagine? Every knock on the door, every look from a stranger on the street, it could mean the end. Every day is a gamble.
And his father wasn't there to help them navigate this.
No. His father was arrested early on. He was taken to an Eastern labor camp. The biography details that he was tortured, forced into slave labor.
Unbelievable.
He did survive, miraculously, and was reunited with the family after the war. But young Andy spent his most formative years with a missing father and a mother constantly on the run, just trying to survive until the next sunrise.
So the war ends, the Nazis are defeated, and you would think, okay, we made it. Stability is returned.
But that is the tragedy of Eastern Europe in that era. One totalitarian regime was just swapped for another. The Soviets roll in.
The Siege of Budapest.
Which was brutal. And then a Stalinist puppet government is installed. So the fear doesn't go away, it just changes its uniform.
Gróf wrote about this in his memoir, Swimming Across. He said that by the time he was 20, he had lived through a fascist dictatorship, German military occupation, the final solution, the Soviet siege, and then the daily repression of the Iron Curtain.
He didn't just read about instability in a history book, he was molded by it. He was forged in it. He learned a very specific lesson, which is that society is fragile.
Right.
Systems collapse. Order is not the default state. Chaos is. And when things collapse, nobody is coming to save you. You save yourself or you perish.
Which brings us to 1956. He's 20 years old. The Hungarian Revolution.
This is a pivotal moment in Cold War history. The Hungarian people, led largely by students and workers, they rise up against Soviet control.
And for a few days, it looks like it might actually work.
It does. There's this incredible brief flash of freedom. They tear down the Stalin statues. There's what Gróf called chaotic democracy in the streets.
But then the tanks came back.
The Soviets crushed it ruthlessly. People were being rounded up. Executions started. And Andy Gróf, at age 20, realizes the window is closing.
He has to make a binary choice.
A life or death choice. Stay and likely face arrest or a life of quiet repression. Or leave everything he has ever known, his family, his home, his language.
He chooses to run, and the details of the escape they're harrowing. He leaves his parents behind, not knowing if he'll ever see them again.
He heads for the Austrian border with a friend. They're moving at night. They're dodging patrols with flares and dogs. He eventually crawls through the cold mud of a ditch to cross into Austria.
And I want to just pause on the image of him arriving in Austria.
Yeah.
He is 20 years old. He has the clothes on his back. He has no money. And he barely speaks a word of English.
It really reframes the concept of risk for the rest of his life, doesn't it?
Completely. I mean, think about it. Later in his career, business journalists would ask him about the risk of investing $1 billion in a new factory or launching a new chip.
And he would just look at them.
You can imagine him thinking, you don't know what risk is. To him, a drop in the stock price isn't risk. Risk is a guy with a rifle at the border. Risk is extinction.
Business problems are just that. They're problems. They're not life or death threats. He'd already faced the real thing.
So he makes his way to the United States in 1957. And this is where the story shifts from sheer survival to, well, to conquest. The speed at which he adapts to America is frankly almost unbelievable.
It is the ultimate immigrant hustle. He lands in New York, and he knows he needs money, so he starts working as a busboy at a resort in the Catskills.
Which is actually a sweet side note. That is where he met his wife, Eva.
That's right. She was a waitress, also a refugee from Austria. They connected over that shared experience. They were married in 1958 and stayed married for 58 years until his death.
A rare constant in what was otherwise such a chaotic life.
It really was. But while he is bussing tables, he enrolls at the City College of New York, CCNY. Now remember, he barely speaks English.
I can't even imagine.
He has to translate the engineering textbooks word by word, initially from English to Hungarian, just to understand the concepts. The sheer willpower involved is staggering.
The New York Times had a great line about this period. They wrote, "A refugee became a senior in engineering." It's so simple, but it captures the whole journey.
And he graduated in 1960. Not just graduated, but at the top of his class. That is just 3 years after crawling through the mud in Austria.
And he didn't stop to catch his breath. He went straight from New York to California.
Straight to UC Berkeley. He gets his PhD in chemical engineering by 1963, so let's just recap that. In 6 years, he goes from a penniless, stateless refugee who doesn't speak the language to Dr. Andrew Gróf, PhD, from one of the best universities in the world.
That academic tenacity gets him hired at a place called Fairchild Semiconductor. Now, for those who aren't deep into Silicon Valley lore, we should probably explain Fairchild.
Oh, yeah. Fairchild is the Genesis block. It is the company that spawned almost every other major chip company. If you look at a family tree of Silicon Valley, the roots are at Fairchild.
It's where the integrated circuit was really commercialized.
Exactly. It was the center of the universe for this new technology, and it is where Grove meets the other two titans of this story, Robert Noyce and Gordon Moore.
The triumvirate. You cannot tell the story of Intel without these three.
No, and the dynamic was fascinating because they were so different. They were three legs of a stool, and each one was essential.
Right, so you have Robert Noyce. He's the face, the co-inventor of the integrated circuit. He's handsome, he's charismatic, the visionary who could charm investors and rally the troops.
Then you have Gordon Moore. He's the brain. Quiet, thoughtful, the brilliant scientist who came up with Moore's law, the idea that computing power doubles roughly every 2 years. He was the pure technologist.
And then there's Grove.
Grove was the fist, or maybe the engine. Noyce and Moore were the dreamers. Grove was the guy who actually made sure the damn things got built. He was the operations guy.
The discipline.
He was the one who imposed discipline on the chaos of manufacturing something that was, at the time, basically magic.
So in 1968, Noyce and Moore decide to leave Fairchild to start a new company. They call it Intel, short for Integrated Electronics.
And on the day of incorporation, Grove joins them. He walks away from a secure job at Fairchild to bet on this new venture.
He wasn't technically a founder on the paperwork. He was employee number 3 or 4, depending on how you count the receptionist.
Right.
But spiritually, he was the third founder. There is no Intel without him.
Absolutely not. He was initially the director of engineering. His job was to take the brilliant ideas from Moore and Noyce and figure out how to manufacture these microscopic devices at scale, reliably and profitably.
Which was a massive challenge.
A huge challenge. He wrote a textbook on it, actually, while at Fairchild, Physics and Technology of Semiconductor Devices. He literally wrote the book on how to build this stuff.
And they succeed. Intel takes off. The revenue numbers are just staggering. It goes from $2,672 in the first year to over $20 billion by the time he steps down as CEO.
And in the 1970s, Intel is the absolute king of the memory chip market. And this is a really important distinction for what comes later. Intel was a memory company.
Right. They weren't making the brains of computers yet.
Correct. They invented the Durium dynamic random access memory. For the first 15 years of its life, Intel's identity, their revenue, their soul was tied to memory chips. They were printing money.
They also dabbled in other things, right?
Yeah.
I read they made some of the first digital watches and calculators.
They did. They were exploring the applications of their technology. But the cash cow, the core business, was memory for mainframe computers.
But then comes the mid-'80s. And this leads us to what is probably the most famous business case study in history, the Great Pivot.
This is the textbook definition of what Grove would later call a strategic inflection point.
So set the scene for us. It's 1984, 1985. Intel is, on paper, dominant in its field. But something is happening in the market.
The Japanese competition arrived, and they arrived in force. Companies like Toshiba, NEC, Hitachi, they had studied American methods, improved on them, and they had figured out how to manufacture memory chips with incredibly high quality.
And at a massive scale.
A massive scale. And they were ruthless on price.
This is the dumping accusation.
Exactly. They were selling chips in the U.S. market, often below their own cost of production, just to capture market share and drive American companies out of business.
And it was working.
It was devastating. Intel's prices were being undercut by 10%, 20%, 30%. Intel started bleeding red ink. They were losing millions of dollars a month. The company was in a death spiral.
Now, here's where the paranoia concept gets real. Most CEOs in that position would double down. They would say, we just need to work harder. We need to cut costs. We need to market better. We need to ask the government for protection.
And that is exactly what the internal culture at Intel wanted to do. They were in denial. The sales team, the engineers, they all said, we are a memory company. We can't stop making memory.
Just an emotional attachment.
It was their identity. It was what they did. It was like telling Ford to stop making cars.
But Grove saw it differently. And there's this famous conversation he had with Gordon Moore that captures his genius for clear, ruthless thinking perfectly.
It's one of my favorite anecdotes in all of business history. Grove is in his office with Moore. They're looking out the window at this Ferris wheel revolving in the distance at an amusement park. And the mood is just grim.
They're at a dead end.
Completely. And Grove turns to Moore and asks this brilliant hypothetical question. He says, Gordon, if we got kicked out, and the board brought in a new CEO, what do you think he would do?
And Moore doesn't even hesitate.
No. Moore says instantly he would get us out of memories.
And Grove just looks at him and says the killer line. Why shouldn't you and I walk out that door, come back in, and do it ourselves?
That is the moment. It sounds so simple, but think about the psychological difficulty, the courage it takes. They had to kill their own baby.
They had to admit that the product that built the entire company was now a liability.
A boat anchor. And they did it. They decided to exit the memory business entirely. They shut down factories, laid off thousands of people. It was brutal.
To focus on what, though? At the time, what was the alternative?
It was this other, much smaller, almost niche line of business they had, the microprocessor, the CPU.
The thing that eventually becomes the Intel Inside.
Exactly. They had developed some of the world's first microprocessors, like the 4004 and the 8080. They were the core of the first hobbyist computers like the Altair. But it was still a small business compared to memory.
Now, we need to get a little technical here because this isn't just swapping one product for another. The economics of memory chips versus microprocessors are totally different.
Night and day. And this explains why the pivot was so brilliant and so hard.
Explain that.
Memory chips are a commodity. Think of them like wheat or steel or a blank notebook. If I sell you a memory chip and a Japanese company sells you a memory chip, they both just store data. It doesn't really matter who made it.
So the only way to compete is on price.
It is a race to the bottom. It's about who has the cheapest labor and the biggest factory. A terrible business to be in if you're a high-cost American company.
Okay, so that's memory. What about a microprocessor?
A microprocessor is a platform. It is the brain of the computer. Once you write software for a specific microprocessor architecture, like the Intel by 86 architecture, that software doesn't run on a different chip without a lot of work.
It's sticky. It creates lock-in.
It's a monopoly. If you can make your chip the standard, you own the entire ecosystem. You aren't competing on price anymore. You are competing on performance. And everyone has to buy your chip to run their software.
It's a much better business to be in.
Infinitely better. But to make that work, they needed a killer deal. They needed to become the standard.
And that is the IBM deal.
This is where Grove's toughness as a negotiator and a strategist came in. IBM was launching the personal computer, the PC. It was a huge deal. Grove and his team, led by a guy named Earl Whetstone, they negotiated ferociously.
And they convinced IBM to use the Intel 8088 chip as the brain of the IBM PC.
Yes, and that was the coup. But the even bigger win was a mistake IBM made. IBM decided to make the PC an open standard, meaning other companies could make clones of it.
Like Compaq, Dell, HP.
All of them. And because the IBM PC became the standard for business, every one of those clone makers had to use the Intel chip too if they wanted to be compatible and run all the business software, like Lotus 123 and WordPerfect.
So Grove didn't just win the IBM deal. He won the entire industry.
He locked Intel into the DNA of the personal computer revolution.
The result?
Absolute crushing dominance for decades. During Grove's tenure as CEO from 87 to 98, Intel's market cap went from $4 billion to $197 billion.
4,500% increase.
It's an insane number. Intel became the 7th largest company in the world. They went from a struggling memory manufacturer on the brink of bankruptcy to the Intel Inside powerhouse that we all know.
And that pivot was only possible because Grove was paranoid enough to see if the memory business was dead before it actually killed them.
Exactly. And that leads us to the core of his philosophy. He took that traumatic near-death experience and he codified it. He turned it into a system.
Right. Only the paranoid survive.
Let's unpack the actual methodology here, because it's not just about being scared all the time. No, it's not about unfocused anxiety. It's about a very specific kind of vigilance. It's about what he called strategic dissonance.
Strategic dissonance. Sounds a bit academic. What does it actually mean?
It's the gap. It's the mismatch between what your senior management is saying and what's actually happening on the ground. It's the difference between your official strategy and the new reality of the market.
So when Intel's leadership was saying, we are a memory company, but the sales team was getting crushed by Japanese competitors, that gap is the dissonance.
That is the strategic dissonance. And Grove believed that every company, no matter how successful, eventually hits a point where the fundamentals of the business change. He called that the strategic inflection point.
A point where the old rules just stop working.
Right. It could be a new technology, a new competitor, a change in regulation, something fundamental shifts. And his theory was that the CEO and the senior VPs are usually the last people to know that the inflection point has happened.
Why? Is it just because they're sitting in the ivory tower?
It's that, yes. They're insulated. They're surrounded by yes men who filter out bad news. They're looking at lagging indicators like last quarter's profits, which look fine right up until they fall off a cliff.
So who does know?
The people on the front lines, the people on the periphery,
Yeah.
the people who Gróf called the Cassandras.
We mentioned Cassandra earlier, the figure from Greek mythology who could predict the future but was cursed so that no one would ever believe her.
In a company, the Cassandras are the sales reps who keep losing deals to a new, cheaper competitor. They're the junior engineers who see a new technology at a conference and think, hey, this is way better than what we're making.
They see the snow melting at the edges, as Gróf put it.
That's his phrase. They see the early warning signs. But in most corporate cultures, what happens to those people?
They're ignored. Or worse, they're punished for being negative or not a team player.
Exactly. And Gróf's genius was to flip that entirely, he said. You must cherish the Cassandras. You must create a culture where bad news travels fast. You have to amplify those weak signals.
This brings us to constructive confrontation. Because I've read stories about Intel meetings, and they sound loud.
Laughs.
They were incredibly intense. Yelling was common, swearing was common. People would pound the table. But it wasn't chaotic aggression. It was structured. There was a core rule.
Which was?
We argue about issues, not people. You attack the data, you attack the logic, you attack the proposal. You never attack the person who brought the proposal.
But did that actually work in practice? Or was it just an excuse for bullying?
By all accounts, it worked because of the second, even more important rule, the egalitarian ethos. Gróf had a saying, knowledge power trumps positional power.
Meaning what?
Meaning, if you are a junior engineer fresh out of college and you have the data that proves Andy Gróf, the CEO, is wrong, you are not only allowed to say it, you are expected to win the argument.
And Gróf would actually back down. The stories say yes. Craig Barrett, who succeeded him as CEO, said it's give and take, he's not above it. Gróf wanted the truth more than he wanted to be right. He viewed politeness or deference to authority as a form of lying.
How so?
If you are being polite instead of telling your boss that the product has a fundamental flaw, you are hurting the company to protect your boss's feelings. And Gróf had no time for that. He wanted the unvarnished, brutal truth as quickly as possible.
And he stripped away all the physical trappings of power to reinforce this.
The famous cubicles. This is maybe the most well-known part of his style. Andy Gróf, running one of the biggest, most important companies on Earth, sat in a standard 8 by 9 foot cubicle.
Same as everyone else.
Exactly the same. No mahogany paneled corner office, no private jet, no executive dining room, no special parking spots, no executive washrooms, nothing.
It sends a pretty powerful message, doesn't it? I am in the trenches with you.
It says, we are all soldiers in this war, but it's also practical. It kept the information flow open. If the CEO is behind 3 assistants and a locked door, you're never going to tell him the bad news.
You're too intimidated.
Right. But if he's in the cubicle next to you, you might just lean over and say, Andy, this chip has a bug and we need to talk about it. It flattens the organization and speeds everything up.
He also had this insane attention to detail.
Oh, obsessive. The devil is in the details, was one of his mottos. He would correct his own spelling errors in memos, even though English was his second language. He feared that brilliance and great strategy would come to nothing without disciplined execution.
Now, managing this kind of high confrontation, high information chaos requires a system. You can't just have everyone yelling at each other all day.
No, you need a framework.
And this is where Gróf's engineering mind really shines. He gave us the management tool that basically runs every modern tech company, OKRs.
Objectives and key results. If you work at Google, LinkedIn, Amazon, Netflix, or really any venture-backed startup today, you use some version of these.
But they started with Gróf at Intel.
Yes, he developed the system from earlier management by objective theories and taught it in an internal course at Intel in the 1970s. And in one of those classes was a young sales guy named John Doerr,
Who later becomes a legendary venture capitalist at Kleiner Perkins.
the legendary VC. And in 1999, Doerr, having invested in a small search engine startup, taught the system to its 2 young founders.
Larry Page and Sergey Brin at Google.
And the rest is history.
So what is the Gróf flavor of OKR? How does it differ from just, setting goals?
It's about extreme clarity and separating the what from the how.
Okay.
The objective is the what. It's the destination. It should be qualitative, inspirational, dominate the PC microprocessor market, or launch the best personal computer.
And the key results are the how.
Well, more like the how do we know we got there. They are the measurable milestones. Win 50 new PC design wins by Q3. Achieve 99% yield in the new factory. Ship 10,000 units by December 1st.
And the magic is in the measurement. It has to be quantifiable.
It has to be brutally, unambiguously quantifiable.
Well,
This was the Gróf litmus test. He said, a key result has to be binary. At the end of the quarter, you ask, did I do it? Yes or no?
simple.
Did I ship 10,000 units? Yes or no? There are no arguments. No, I tried really hard. No, well, the market was tough, but we made good progress. It's just yes or no.
It's ruthless.
It is, but it's clarifying. Gróf believed that if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And if you can't manage it, you can't improve it. It forces discipline and accountability into the whole organization.
And Larry Page from Google credits OKRs with allowing the company to achieve 10x growth many times over.
Because it kept everyone aligned. When you have thousands of brilliant engineers, they can all run off in different directions. OKRs turn that disorganized mob into a focused vector, with everyone pushing in the same direction.
It's applying engineering physics to managing human beings.
Precisely. It's a system for converting human effort into predictable output. Very Gróf.
I want to shift gears now, because so far, we have painted a picture of Gróf as the ultimate Silicon Valley capitalist. Ruthless, competitive, a free market conqueror.
The ultimate survivor.
Right. But when you dig into his economic writings, especially later in his life, you find something that surprised me, something much more complex.
You find a man who was deeply, deeply worried about the future of the American economy.
He wrote a famous, almost infamous article for Bloomberg in 2010, and in it, he basically attacks the modern Silicon Valley playbook.
One he helped create.
Exactly. He draws this sharp distinction between startups and scale-ups.
This is a critical insight, and it's more relevant today than it was when he wrote it. Gróf argued that as a society, we've become obsessed with startups. Two guys in a garage inventing a new app.
It's romantic. It's the American dream.
It's romantic, and it gets all the headlines. But he said startups don't solve the national economic problem. Startups, he argued, create wealth for a few people, the founders, the VCs. But jobs, mass employment, a stable middle class, that comes from scaling. It comes from manufacturing.
And his big problem was that American companies had stopped scaling in America.
Right. The playbook had become invent the product in California, get the venture funding in California, but then build the factory in China or Taiwan or Vietnam. Gróf called this the exit strategy for American manufacturing.
Now, the standard economist argument, the free trade argument, is that's fine, that's efficient. We do the high-value design and marketing work here, and we outsource the low-value assembly work over there.
Gróf hated that argument. He thought it was dangerously short-sighted. He called it the innovation machine paradox.
Break that down for us. Why did he think that was so dangerous?
He believed that innovation isn't just a brilliant idea you have in the shower. True, sustainable innovation comes from the struggle of making things. He called it tacit knowledge, the knowledge you can't write down in a textbook.
Give us an example of that.
Okay, take batteries for electric cars. If you want to design a better, cheaper, more powerful battery, you need to understand the chemistry, sure. But you also need to understand the manufacturing tolerances, the supply chain for lithium, the way the machines that assemble the cells actually work.
The hands-on stuff.
The hands-on stuff. If the factory is 6,000 miles away, your brilliant PhD designers in Palo Alto lose touch with the physical reality of the product. They get separated from the manufacturing learning curve.
So he argued that if you lose the ability to scale the technology,
Eventually, you lose the ability to invent the next generation of it.
you forget how to make the thing.
And once you forget, the innovation itself moves to where the factories are, which is exactly what we have seen with batteries, with solar panels, with advanced displays. The U.S. invented them, but Asia perfected them and now leads in the next generation.
It is incredibly prescient, given the conversations we are having right now in the 2020s about supply chains and national security and bringing chip manufacturing back to the U.S. with the CHPS Act.
He was the Cassandra again. He was waving a giant red flag about this in 2010. He wrote, and this is a direct quote, "The U.S. has become wildly inefficient at creating American tech jobs."
And his proposed solutions were controversial, to say the least.
Very. He sounded like a protectionist, which was shocking coming from a Silicon Valley CEO. He said job creation should be the #1 national priority, even above things like maximizing shareholder value.
And he suggested a mechanism for it.
He did. He suggested taxing imported products from countries that were subsidizing their own industries and then using that tax revenue to subsidize domestic manufacturing here to help American companies scale up at home.
He knew that would be called protectionism.
Oh, yeah. He ended the article by saying, if what I'm suggesting sounds protectionist, so be it. He used the phrase, fight to win. He viewed nations as competitors, just like companies. He thought the U.S. was resting on its laurels, acting like its post-war dominance was guaranteed.
And coming from where he came from, he knew nothing is ever guaranteed.
Absolutely nothing. It all circles back to that core trauma. He looks at the U.S. economy and he sees a system that is making itself fat, complacent, and vulnerable. He sees a strategic inflection point that the politicians and economists are ignoring.
He believed that a society that cannot make its own essential goods is fragile.
And Andrew Grove hated fragility more than anything else.
He also had some other interesting thoughts on the internet and privacy that were, again, way ahead of their time.
He did. This was in the early 2000s. He argued against the idea that e-commerce should be tax-free. He said it was a subsidy that physical stores didn't get and it wasn't necessary. He was in the minority, but he turned out to be right.
And on privacy.
He viewed personal data as property, your property. He believed the government's role was to regulate property rights and that it should create a uniform federal standard for data privacy. He didn't trust companies to self-regulate.
Which, again, coming from the CEO of Intel, is a very strong statement.
It shows his pragmatism. He wasn't a blind ideologue. He believed in whatever worked to create a strong, resilient system.
Let's look at the final chapter of his life. Because even as he stepped down from the CEO role in 1998, moving to chairman, he faced his biggest personal battle.
The medical challenges, yes. He was diagnosed with prostate cancer in the mid-90s, and then in 2000, he was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease.
And true to form, he didn't just passively have the disease, he managed it. He attacked it.
He absolutely attacked it. He treated his own body like a struggling division of Intel. He became an expert on his own conditions. He collected his own data. He plotted his PSA levels on charts. He read all the scientific papers.
He challenges doctors.
Oh, constantly. There was a famous story where he basically designed his own radiation treatment plan for his cancer because he analyzed the data and wasn't satisfied with the standard of care his doctors were proposing. And his plan worked.
It's the engineer's mindset applied to his own biology.
It's only the paranoid survive on a cellular level. He wasn't going to be a passive victim. He was going to be the CEO of his own health.
He also put his money where his mouth was, philanthropically.
Millions and millions of dollars into medical research. He was instrumental in building the UCSF Mission Bay campus in San Francisco, specifically the cancer research centers. He wanted to speed up the cycle time of medical research. He thought science moved too slowly.
He wanted to apply Intel's pace to finding cures.
Exactly.
And he never forgot his roots. He never forgot where he came from.
No, never. In 2005, he gave a $26 million grant to CCNY, the City College of New York.
His alma mater.
It was the largest single gift in the school's entire history. He established the Grove School of Engineering there. He said, and I'm paraphrasing, CCNY didn't just educate me, it saved me. It was the institution that gave a penniless refugee a chance.
He was also very vocal about immigration throughout his life.
He was a passionate supporter of the International Rescue Committee, the IRC, which helps refugees. He advocated for pathways to citizenship. He gave an interview to Esquire magazine where he said, immigrants are what made America what it is.
He saw it as a competitive advantage.
The ultimate competitive advantage? He believed that the hunger of the immigrant, that desperation to prove yourself, that paranoia, was the secret sauce of America's success. He didn't want the country to lose that edge.
He didn't want us to get comfortable.
He never wanted anyone to get comfortable. Comfort was the enemy.
So Andy Grove died in 2016 at the age of 79. But when we look around today, his fingerprints are just everywhere.
They're indelible. Every laptop with that Intel Inside sticker, every tech company using OKRs to manage its goals, every CEO talking about the need to pivot their business model, it's all Grove.
But I think you're right, the most enduring legacy is the mindset.
The mindset. The good fear, as you called it.
Yeah. There was another famous management guru, a contemporary of his named W. Edwards Deming, who had a famous mantra, drive out fear. He believed fear was always counterproductive.
And Grove completely disagreed. He wrote about it. He said, fear of competition, fear of bankruptcy, fear of being wrong, fear of losing. These can all be powerful, powerful motivators.
It's the fuel that keeps the engine running hot.
It keeps the organism alive. Grove often compared a company to a living thing. He said it must constantly shed its skin to survive. If you try to hold on to the past, like Intel tried to hold on to memory chips, you die. The world moves on and you become a fossil.
You have to be willing to kill your old self to give birth to your new self.
A painful but necessary process.
So here's the final thought for you listening today. We all have our own businesses that we run. Maybe it's your actual company. Maybe it's just your career. Maybe it's your skill set.
The question Andy Grove would ask all of us, is this. Are you resting on your laurels? Are you comfortable? Are you assuming that what made you successful yesterday will make you successful tomorrow?
Because if you are comfortable, you are probably in trouble.
The strategic inflection point is coming. It's always coming. For every business, every industry, every career, the snow is melting at the edges, whether you see it or not.
The only question is, are you paranoid enough to survive it?
Thanks for diving in with us.
Stay paranoid. We'll see you next time.